Well, hello, and thanks for joining me and John Christensen to talk about what victory looks like. It's brilliant to have Dr. Gail Bradbrook with us here, the co-founder of Extinction Rebellion, named as the #1 influencer in the world on the climate emergency. And it's no coincidence that Gail was on the Tax Justice Network's board for a number of years. And of course, tax justice, economic, social, racial justice, reparational justice, climate justice, you can't spend long caring about any of those things without finding they're all part of the same thing. And so we're living through times at the moment where it's pretty hard to feel hopeful about the future, and I hope that we can make some inroads there today. And the difficulty we come up against time and time again with the Tax Justice Network is 4 little words: we can't afford it. And that rings so true on the one hand for many people who are struggling financially, but we see that governments can and are affording to subsidise companies and the very wealthy in our name. And there's an untapped ocean of money out there. We know that tax systems in most of the world are stacked in favour of the very wealthy. There's as much as $32 trillion stashed offshore. The equivalent of one nurse's salary, annual salary, is lost to a tax haven every second. And just the other day we heard about Kellogg's minimising their tax bill using Ireland to deprive other nations of their tax revenue, at the same time clocking up a tax credit of close to 100 million euros. And, you know, this is by no means unusual. Shell and all the oil companies are using tax havens, saving hundreds of millions of dollars in taxes. We're really being taken for a ride. And it's a kind of sickness that is flowing against all evidence, common sense, human preservation. And, you know, we can't afford not to act. And yes, we can afford it. So let's get out of that mind trap. I imagine for a moment, you know, how transformational the $5 trillion a year subsidies of the fossil fuel sector money would be if it was transferred in service to people. And that's before we even get on to wealth taxes, excess profit taxes, fair corporate taxes, ending financial secrecy. There's a whole load of things that we could and should be doing. So today it'd be really good to talk with Gail on where we really want to be, living in a world where we do sensible things and not stupid things. And so today, Gail, it'd be really good to hear from you about your dreams for the future. I mean, where do you see the world being in terms of climate transition in 10 years' time? What makes you most hopeful?
Thank you, and it's really an honour to be here amongst friends and colleagues. Something hugely hopeful happened yesterday. You may not have had time to spot it, and I think it's a chink. I think there are many chinks happening at the moment in the global political economy, and as the Deutsche Bank economist said, either we deal with the issues in it, I'm paraphrasing them, in which case the civilization's finished, or we let it carry on, in which case the civilization's finished. I mean, it's bringing itself down, right? The big chink yesterday was that a global citizens' assembly is being championed, including, quite almost miraculously it feels, by Nigel Toppin, who's the senior advisor on at the COP for the government. I think I got that right. Picture a global citizens assembly. That's 1,000 people chosen by lottery, sort of randomly, like jury service, to think about the state of the world. And I can tell you the team behind this, because I helped to seed it, are the best people in the world to do this, and they've started their work making links in the global south. That would be 50% women. I mean, the COP process is, you know, there's an issue there of gender. God knows why we're still on that one, but we are. 50% women, only 10% white faces, to think about the systemic issues in the world. So that makes me feel hugely hopeful that that space is opening up, because we have to do something dramatic around the political economy. And it's the job of Extinction Rebellion, in particular a campaign I'm leading in that called Money Rebellion, to help open that space up for these conversations. Do you want me to say more? I mean, the other thing that the thing that I've really, I hope, another hopeful thing, I think that I hope people have seen that there are different kinds of power. And when you're faced with the power of money and the power that that gives people, it feels really hard to deal with. And where our power lies is the places where we can come together. And of course, we've been desperately separated. The tragedy of George Floyd and the way that that has helped waken up, and there's so much more to do, of course, but the climate movement to racial justice has been a phenomenon to watch. We have to do this bringing together. In XR, we have a strong focus on internationalist solidarity. So being together, the power of the only way I can really say it is when you don't give a fuck anymore, to be really honest, when you don't care what they're going to do to you. And that's the power that is embodied in a movement of civil disobedience. We're not here to I mean, it's not really about breaking the law, because actually there's a defense of necessity in law, but that there's been an emotional consciousness shift that's happened. And the way I would say it is, first of all, don't try and be hopeful, because it is awful and it is a deeply disturbing thing to face, this crisis. So the first thing is to give up hope and look into the abyss and grieve and feel the remorse and feel the terror and feel the despair. And I often say to people, don't do it on your own, but face this thing. And what we see, and especially, you know, we like to celebrate post-menopausal women in this, like grandmother energy, she's not having it anymore, you know. So that's a real power that the system cannot resist when it can get together and get organized. And we've just been around for 2 years. Of course, not everything's been perfect, but I think we've demonstrated what that power looks like alongside other movements like Sunrise and Fridays for the Future.
Yeah, and I'm glad you mentioned about you know, the parts of the world that you know, have done the least to cause the devastation that they're now facing. And I know in the next panel there's going to be some talking about climate reparations. And I think, you know, one of the most powerful things for me about the Extinction Rebellion and the way that they've approached things that has been so effective is to move beyond sort of evidence and fact-based arguments and connect people up with that, because denial is part of this thing that has really, you know, we do have to look into the abyss. I think there's a lot in that. I think, I wonder if we can talk about some of the hopeful things that, despite looking into the abyss, that, you know, the hopeful things we can talk about in terms of what a climate transition can deliver for people who are really, really struggling at the moment. I mean, somebody mentioned earlier about how a Gilets Jaunes protester said, they worry about the end of the world, we worry about the end of the month. There is a lot that is part of our solutions that can give people hope and are practically really, really quite simple. I wonder if we can talk about some of those.
I really like the way George Monbiot says it. I don't know if he invented this phrase, but he talks about private sufficiency. We don't all need a lawnmower and a, you know, I'm trying to think of the things that haven't got, you know, stuff. We've all got too much stuff, right? We don't all need a massive garden and so on. Private sufficiency and public luxury, so that we need first-class public transport services. It might include shared electric vehicles. There's a plethora of ways that can be dealt with. Universal basic services. I know you had Anna Coots on your Taxcast talking about that. And localization of the economy has to happen, and getting rid of nonsense like built-in obsolescence, which means things have to get fixed and be designed to fix. You can use 3D printing of parts and so on. And I think underneath all of that, as much as you can talk about jobs and the necessity of the redistribution of wealth. You know, which is an issue in itself. You know, these 2,000 billionaires having the same wealth as half the world, approximately. That if the carbon emission of the richest was reduced to that of the average European, carbon emissions would go down by a third, right? So that's some of the baked-in issues around inequality. All that said, you know, localizing economy, a repair economy, a circular economy, public luxury, you know, sharing economy, it requires community. And what we know the neoliberal project has done through financializations is to break communities, is to really try and turn everything into a monetized process. And we need each other as human beings, and there's nothing like COVID to have shown us what getting physically separated from each other does to us. So I think that real promise of rediscovering community and gift and reciprocity is the real promise of a green transition.
Yes, we've got a few questions trickling in for you, but the prognosis is pretty grim, isn't it? And we know even if nations took the action they need to, and they're not even doing that to fulfill their commitments to the Paris Agreement, how do we sort of navigate the fear and the switch off that people feel when they can see that the governments are failing to do the right things? And, you know, you end up with this sort of disconnect of people who just don't feel like, you know, they can do much about the end of the world.
Yeah, I mean, part of what I've been working on in Extinction Rebellion is called Money Rebellion, and it's about addressing those of us that could choose to not pay debt and taxes, and some of us that can't pay. You know, we're in a situation where we're struggling under the burdens of debt, and to support the removal of shame that's been deliberately set up there. And so the kinds of things that we're up to, we're using what we call conditional commitment, which means I'll do it if you'll do it. So there's already a live conditional commitment. Would you stop paying your mortgage if 5,000 people joined you? So, you know, that's a sort of safety in numbers thing. And of course, you know, there's details there about how far people take it and so on. Another thing is that we are going to make reparations on behalf of major banks that are actively harming the world. So there'll be lots of sort of spoofs of the banks handing over checks, but some of us have got credit cards with these banks, and we're going to make the payments that they need to be making to organisations like Survival International. There are other organisations involved, but we'll be repairing their harm actively. We have to open up now this conversation about the political economy being a systemic problem, and that's what this global citizens assembly could look at. So I'm sure, as everybody knows, it's got destruction baked in because of growthism. It's systemically corrupt, and it's captured to vested interests. And I heard in the previous session people saying, let's take this to the doors of BlackRock, which we have. There was a stickering of 200 Barclays branches recently. We took on the enablers at Tufton Street. There's more to come. My dream with others is we're going to go to PwC or something like that. Some of us will join us on that. But we have to work on building a force of financial civil disobedience, both on the streets and with our actual money, that is demonstrating the political economy that we need to see. And I think there's a way of doing that that doesn't put us into this sort of sense of being in a polarized camp. Oh, you know, it's so boring, isn't it? Oh, you must be anti-capitalist then, like that means that you hate all businesses and think markets are a bad thing. You know, it's like by the way, I think Extinction Rebellion is potentially going to be seen as an extremist organisation. You can't talk about it in schools because we might be anti-capitalist. You know, you're not allowed to talk about a political economy destroying, killing life on Earth. Well, that space is opening. I mean, I got to ask Mark Carney a question about that at the Reith lecture. It's Caroline Lucas is advocating and in many spaces that we have to have this conversation now about what is it about our political economy that has failed to act on this crisis, and all the others that are interrelated for many years now. And I think that we need to be really courageous and visionary in believing that this is possible, because I wouldn't be here doing this. It's not all fun if I didn't think we could. So I can see the cracks opening, and that's all, you know, whichever bits you can do, but join us in the, it's mischievous, join us in the mischief.
Yeah, I mean, we're all for taking on the enablers, and we've talked about, you know, some work on putting together lists of some of the main offenders, not just in tax justice point of view, but of course in, you know, climate damage and destruction point of view. And very often they're some of the same players because it's part of the same kind of rule book. I wonder if we can talk a bit about being pro-growth, because there's a lot of confusion around economic growth and how, you know, GDP-led growth is not what we want to be focused on, but we do want to be focused on good growth, right? We're talking about growth in caring, in education, in conservation, in public transport. You know, maybe you could talk a bit about that.
Yeah, I think we need to develop some real literacy around this and perhaps some shared language. There is this concept of green growth, and so if you say you're pro-growth, people might think that you're in that camp. And I think what you're saying, Naomi, is that that we need to measure what we value, and what we value include social progress indicators, include environmental progress indicators, which are baked into other measures of human progress beyond, you know, even Simon Kuznets, I'm sure people know, who invented GDP, said it's an awful measure, please don't use it. I mean, I'm paraphrasing it. And so genuine progress indicators and others show that we're in recession, and we have been for a long time. And that we know from the data that economic GDP growth only tracks to social progress for a short time, and then it decouples. I think the problem of using the phrase pro-growth rather than embracing degrowth, or, you know, whatever, is that it sounds like we might be back in this idea that we can grow our way out of the climate crisis, and it's a climate and ecological crisis. You know, it may be the case. I'd like to believe the sincerity of Mark Carney and others that finance capital can invest in part of the transition, but a significant piece of it is that we have to stop consuming as much, and we have to deal with mass damage and destruction of the environment and so on, and biodiversity loss, and the erosion of the soil and the pollution of the water. There are many baked in issues. So I think that we can celebrate a transition to a different way of being together. I'm not sure that I would use pro-growth as because I don't think we've got enough. I know what you mean, but I don't think we've got enough understanding out there. So I mean, just to say, in Extinction Rebellion, I mean, I've just done a little economic literacy video for colleagues, and we've got a money rebellion talk. We've now trained about I think 20 to 30 people in giving that talk, in the same way that we were spreading the information about the science of climate change. You know, we are now saying we need to tell the truth, that the political economy is hardwired to destroy life on Earth, and we need an open, you know, grown-up conversation about why we failed so far. And acting now involves stopping financing stupid things, and also realigning to an economic system to be designed by us. You know, as Ha-Joon Chang said, tell me the kind of economy you want and we'll design it for you, to be designed by a citizens' assembly and with expert advice, you know, but that would be focused on repairing the damage that we've done, to minimizing harm, and to preparing for crises, because no matter what we do now, we've got one after another crises to come.
Yeah, I've got a lovely question from a 10-year-old son, which I can't resist. He wants to know, what are the lessons learned from setting up Extinction Rebellion?
I think I got to see his extinction symbol in the snow that he did last year. One of the best things that I've learned is it's really important to have fun, and to not take yourself too seriously, and to not be so attached to what happens, which might sound odd, but it's like by letting go of trying too hard, and actually, as I said in my little sweary way, which I perhaps should pipe down on, but I do swear in front of my young ones as well, that it's the place of actually knowing that things are so awful that actually you just have to do what's necessary and feel really strong in that. There's all sorts of other lessons around how to organize and not organize, and how to get things lined up and set up better so you can train people in what you're about and what you're not about. I could probably write a book about it now. But I would more than say that, especially with the young ones that are involved in Fridays for the Future, that the world that we want to create and how we create it matters. How we create it matters, and doing it together with some joy and celebration of life. You know, life wants to be lived, it wants to be enjoyed, I think, as part of that. So that's what I've learned.
Thanks. I hope that's answered his question. I don't want to hog Gail too much, so I'm going to hand over to John to see what questions he'd like to add, and I'll have a look and see what questions we have coming in as well.
Well, hi Gail. First of all, lovely to chat with you. Lovely to hear from you. I want to talk a little bit more about hope, because I think I'm still hopeful. I think, having stared into the abyss, I think you're realistic to say the problems, the multiple crises that we face are mind-boggling and can be overpowering. But my response is normally anger rather than a kind of loss of hope, because I think that's too much for the public to take on. I feel very angry about inequality. I feel very angry about the climate crisis. I feel very angry about debt crisis. I feel very angry about, the continued denial, mainly from former imperial countries, of how they have completely screwed the rest of the world. But that kind of propels me into kind of wanting to seek solutions which bring all of these things together. Now, I want to pick up on one of the things that came out of the previous session. I put a question to Chinyi and about why progressives don't have that kind of infrastructure in place across the world to bring all these things together. They have the Mont Pelerin Society. It was a very long-term and yes, very well-funded organization. But on the progressive side, we kind of were splintered. Environmentalists have not, in my opinion, and we heard this from Jane Boyce yesterday, worked very progressively with, or very carefully with political economists. They haven't worked very well with wider movements on gender issues, inequality issues. We need to bring all of that together. So can you kind of give us a little bit of hope about how we can move forward over the next 10 years to create that kind of global coalition, which my friend and my colleague, Nick Shaxson, is endlessly bending my ear about and saying, we need to create this kind of global coalition. And do you think that that's possible in the next 10 years?
I think I agree that we need to work together more, and just hatching a plot with Richard Murphy at the minute, by the way, to join forces.
As one does.
Yes, of course. And there are things like, the Coalition for Economic Justice. There's Progressive International. There are different attempts at that. We had a space in XR, Movement of Movement space. I think partly, I think on a practical level, so many of us are head down, doing the piece that we need to do, that enough that we have to lift our heads up and notice each other, and find the places where we can connect. But the fact, so to some extent, the separation is not all awful, in the sense that what you have is movement ecology. You have it really is a sort of like ecology of organisms working to push in the same direction sometimes in its best manifestation. What movement ecology, what's important to recognize about that is that we have different roles in it. So, you know, I sort of spent quite a bit of my time with Tax Justice Network going, we need mass civil disobedience. But of course, that wasn't your role. You know, your role is to create the depth of the research and for people to understand what's happening and to get angry and then go and do mass civil disobedience. So that's why you were supporting UK Uncut and others. So we have different roles. So Extinction Rebellion's role, as I often say, we're not here to be liked. That's not our job. So we're not here to kind of necessarily make popular sounding statements. But what happens to me all the time, and I've heard Greta saying this as well, is, you know, civil servants come up to you and others and say, my goodness, the space has changed because of you guys, and or we're Extinction Rebellion but in suits and boots, and I'll never say that publicly, you know, that kind of thing. Senior civil servants, please carry on what you're doing, especially around the COP, you know. So but for Extinction Rebellion, will, you know, civil disobedience as a theory of change, it's only some people will embrace that. And so more you know, other organizations, you was talking to David Hillman recently, Make Poverty History, you know, about working together. There's lots of different ways of aligning, but it's not always about coming together and making a strategy. And I have tried to do that, by the way. I think the other deeper thing to say is I think there's this is my sense. I have no evidence for this, right? With the right, and life's more complicated than a single polarity line, isn't it? But with the right, I can get the sense that people sit in a place that's not that's not loving, and it's about power that's filled a place of despair. And what you can do if you're coming from a place that's more about hatred and about power is you can negotiate with people in quite a cold way. And I sort of feel like with the left, we come with all our longings and our emotion, and some of the reasons why we're in this fight, in this struggle, is because we've been traumatized. It's been written about in social movements about trauma, and that can show up as a lot of conflict, mistrust, and so on the left. And you know, I'd love to listen. Aaron here from Navarra, I'd love us to have some kind of space to really sort of talk about what goes off on the left, the different strengths and focuses that we have, and how we miss each other and what we're trying to do. So I would love us to get together and be more strategic about that, John. I think it's important, but I also don't want people to feel that has to happen in order for progress to be made. Because, you know, with Extinction Rebellion, we did try and talk to, you know, lots of the NGOs and lots of different organizations. In the end, you just get on with it, and then people can see that something that you're doing is effective, and of course critique what you're doing that's not okay.
Yeah, I think we're just about running out of time, but I just perhaps we've got time to sandwich a tiny little comment in a couple of thoughts here about what works and what connects with people. There's been a lot of talk about how facts and evidence don't necessarily sway people. A couple of things that I came across recently was through Ben Phillips's book, which is great, by the way, which is How to Fight Inequality. And he writes about a great union organizer who said that a pamphlet, no matter how good, is never read more than once, but a song is learned by heart and repeated over and over, which I think is really interesting. And I also heard recently from somebody, a grassroots organizer in the States, on a podcast, don't try to understand Trump voters, just try to do things with them. I wonder if a couple of seconds you have left, you know, you can leave us with some equivalent helpful campaigning thoughts.
Oh gosh, I mean, I could always sound like a feckless and hopeless, dreamy hippie. I think I heard somebody say beware the revolution that sings, and the samba bands actually multiple in Extinction Rebellion have been an incredible phenomena to witness. And I think we have to stay in both our heads, hearts and hands with this work, and take care of each other and ourselves as part of that. We're in for a rough ride, you know. This is a big moment in history, and what an exciting time to be alive, eh? As there was a woman from the Amazon, an indigenous woman who came and said, if you're alive at these times, you're here for a reason. And I just often encourage people to really connect with why you're here and whether you're doing what you're here to do. So